You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Welcome to First Contact, the only Star Trek The Next Generation podcast that helps you put a pep in your step. I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
This week we have been watching The Price at a great cost to our personal happiness. This episode was written by Hannah Louise Shearer and directed by Robert Shearer. It first aired the week of November 13th, 1989. James, what is this one all about?
Any idea that money doesn't exist in the 24th century is quickly abandoned with the discovery of the first stable wormhole, which apparently leads to the Gamma Quadrant. A number of parties come on board the Enterprise to negotiate for the rights to maintain the space bridge, including a creepy Norman Bates lookalike, Devin Ral, who for some reason Troy falls in love with after he acts like a sexist weirdo and ruffles her hair. When the Federation delegate falls ill after the Ferengi poison him, Riker steps up to the plate because he's good at poker. It's not like Picard is some kind of diplomacy expert or anything. Riker loses following an immoral gambit by Ral. Following an inspection of the wormhole, Data and Geordi find it's unstable and the terminus has moved locations, and is therefore worthless. And even worse, the Ferengi are stuck in the Delta Quadrant. I wonder if they'll pop up again in a spin-off.
Well, that sounds like there was a lot going on in that episode. Did any of it take your fancy, Alex?
Well, you say to me it's an episode with a conference, I say, ugh. You say, but it's an episode where a conference is being manipulated and everyone's pulling out and gradually the Federation's position's becoming more untenable, and I go, ah. And then you say, it's also an episode where that's the B plot and the main plot is Troy has a massage with some oils, and I go, oh, for f***'s sake.
The thing is, there's an interesting science fiction idea playing out here. A wormhole travelling to a different point in space. Maybe the Gamma Quadrant, maybe the Delta Quadrant. It's almost like some ideas are bubbling under here, which will go on to influence other Star Trek shows. But it is all framed around this romance episode, and it seems to me, and I don't really know Hannah Louise Shearer, that she's never met a human person before or ever engaged in romance, because this is one of the most hideously written and also oddly played human interactions I've ever encountered.
It is utterly bizarre. I'm really confused as to what anyone was thinking at any point of this. And so much so to the extent that I was watching it thinking, well, clearly there's something at work here. Someone's being manipulated. It's the equivalent of the Red Dwarf sexual magnetism virus. No, not at all.
It's an unfortunate trope of Star Trek, and Star Trek The Next Generation in particular, that they force in these love stories. So you essentially have the character just have love at first sight with this random guest star. You're left wondering, is this the bad guy or is this the person that's going to get manipulated? And it's quite obvious because, you know, Divinoni Ral looks so horrifically creepy from the opening moment he arrives that he definitely is the bad guy. It's the same every time when somebody falls in love. It's just turns out it's love at first sight, and then it's all wrapped up nicely at the end. It's happened to Wesley, I think, twice already. It's happened to Troy several times. I'm pretty sure it's happened to Riker a couple of times.
Yeah, TNG has so far not done the whole love, or indeed the whole sex thing very well. In that sense, it's like a teenage boy. And you're right to the extent that it's bloody creepy.
Why can't she read his feelings again?
Because they put a line in the script that said she couldn't.
Alright.
He's just hard to read, wasn't it?
As all the creepy Norman Bates lookalikes are. You just can't get in their heads.
There's also the line, there are much better things to negotiate tonight, which I feel, if anyone said that, they would, you would call security, maybe, or just say, "You're making me uncomfortable. I need to be in my safe space now." And the whole scene where he, like, ruffles her hair in the least sensual way imaginable, just, it's so weird and it's so strangely staged, and it's not seductive or erotic or even nice. It's just all really horrible. It has that idea of just conquest. You know, I'm barging into your apartment and saying, "You're mine now. Go me."
He's the Papa Lazarou of space.
"You're my wife now.
You want to buy some pigs, Dave?"
There's a bit of work early on in the episode to try and establish that Troy is maybe a little dissatisfied with her life, is lonely, is looking for something more that she's not getting. Her job seems to bore her immensely. She doesn't want to go to the big reception. But at the end of it all, I don't feel we learn anything more about Troy. I don't feel we get under her psyche in any way.
No, but I feel that there is something that we learn here, something very interesting about the whole ethos of this grand society, because Troy wants chocolate, but she doesn't want any chocolate. She wants real chocolate, suggesting that all of this replicated food somehow doesn't quite cut the mustard. Somehow there's something artificial and fake about it. So perhaps it's not this ideal future after all. Essentially, all food comes out... I suppose the chocolate probably tastes like Hershey's.
Do you think maybe that's a metaphor, in that Troy is alone in her quarters with a machine, and what she's really wanting is some real chocolate?
Well, there's a euphemistic sentence and a half.
I guess the current kind of philosophy with episodes that we've seen this season, with Michael Piller taking over, is it's about a character. They go through some kind of journey. But in this episode, I don't know. It seems cheap, for one, to have the Troy episode, the female character, be a romance episode. And I suppose in some ways you've had that with Geordie, although falling in love with a hologram, that's using this future setting in some way. But this is a straight romance, and it doesn't seem to me as though she has much agency in it. She's not making the decisions. She's very much there being seduced, and it just seems very poor writing in terms of female characters. More of which later.
Well, I mean, I don't want to jump ahead of ourselves, but I do feel that it's the other plot that's the interesting part to this. But Troy's plot essentially seems to be: man comes on ship, I quite fancy man, we have sex, I discover he can read my thoughts, I sell him down the river. That's it. That is her entire plot, and yet it's the A plot for the episode. It's quite remarkable.
I'd like to talk about the conversation between Beverly and Deanna there.
The one where they're doing some sort of yoga.
I believe the scene that Mr. Plinkett described as, "Oh yeah, baby, work that business."
Yes, that particular scene. Now, I'm sure I read somewhere that said the two actresses weren't getting along, so the writers created this scene to force them to work together in a slightly humiliating way.
They do that with rabbits. That's called stress bonding. They do that with rabbits, and they're doing it with the cast.
Excellent rabbit knowledge. It's so strange. You've got them both in their sort of unitards, stretching, bending a little bit, and talking about boys.
Oh my god, he's just so perfect. Doesn't he look a bit like Norman Bates? Yeah, he does, but he says that I remind him of his mother, and I think that's sweet.
Hey, girls loved Norman Bates. And he loved them too. It's his mother who didn't like them.
Let's move on from Troy slightly, because lots of other characters get stuff to do.
And there is a plot that isn't actually bad here.
No, the other plot is actually quite good, and it's funny. It has interesting ideas. It's just unfortunate that it's at the behest of the plot that's terrible. I mean, the Ferengi stuff, there's funny stuff in there. The whole business with the chairs is alright. It's not hilarious, but for the standards of TNG at this point, it's not bad.
They are beginning to utilise the Ferengi quite well.
Yeah, in some ways. I think... So we have this auction, essentially. This planet, this is their only resource. Basically, nothing else to offer. They rely on handouts and donations for some reason, but this Barzan wormhole, which could change the way travel works in the 24th century, that's interesting. So the Enterprise is hosting a negotiation, and they bring in the Ferengi. But tonally, I suppose you've got this intense romance, then you've got slightly comedy conference. I mean, they are definitely playing that up in some way. The Ferengi are there not to be a threat, but it's comic relief. I mean, essentially, they give the Federation ambassador diarrhea.
See, I like this. This is good. But I also particularly like the moment where the Ferengi goes to the other side of the wormhole. They realise they can't get back, and it does a typical comedy technique of just cutting to their faces. All it required was for them to go, "Oh shit." That's essentially how it freezes, with them going to do basically that. I thought that's great. This should be the light-hearted episode of the season, because that would be good.
No, they have a Ferengi episode, which is the light-hearted episode of the season, and Troy is heavily involved in that one.
As you say, I don't really like the Ferengi. I don't think they actually do get them right until Deep Space Nine. Essentially,
and a lot of their comedy episodes in Deep Space Nine get slated.
Yes, and a lot of that does fall flat, but I think there's a certain depth to the characters at that point, which is absolutely not here in this episode. But I suppose it livens up a conference, and we don't have weird fish creatures eating stuff out of a bucket, which is a bonus.
I'm happy for them to be the quirky next door neighbour that turns up occasionally. You know, occasionally we need some laughs, just because, Christ, it'd be a long slog otherwise. And if they're the device at this point that's used for that, that's fine by me. It's not a problem. I'm not going to say it's constant yucks, but it's fine. You know, it's just that the rest of it's so all over the place, and it's not centered around them. You know, they're a side element to it. They're the funny part of the rest of what's going on. And the rest of what's going on, I'd say, is equally fine as well, for the most part. But, I mean, it is kind of amusing to think now. You think back to that first series and think how the Ferengi were introduced as these big villains. We're quite a long way away from that now. Yes,
and fine, they're using what has been set up in a more appropriate way. What do you think overall, though, of the use of character? I mean, there's lots of people getting something to do in this episode, which is nice, I suppose. And Riker, because, you play poker, so you'll be good at negotiating. It's so off, because we know Picard specialises in this. That's kind of one of his defining character traits, that Picard is this great diplomat, essentially, and he's able to bring people together and presumably also get what he wants in a negotiation. So, do you think throwing Riker in there when he's never done it before, apparently, makes any kind of sense?
I guess tonally for the episode, the only reason that it's done is because you want him to play off against Norman Bates. Because it wouldn't work in the same way with Picard. You need two vaguely similar kind of characters. The suave, although you could argue that one of them definitely doesn't meet that standard. And it wouldn't be the same using Picard for that. But then also you've got that thing of the old flame with Riker. But this is precisely what I mean. This interesting side of the episode is beholden to the side of the episode that no one cares about. Even Troy looks disinterested
I think that's the issue. When I think back to these episodes, I saw the episode The Price and I thought, oh, that's the one where the Ferengis get lost in the Delta Quadrant because of that wormhole. I didn't think, oh, that's the one where Troy falls in love with that creepy guy. You always remember the good bits, at least. It's been strange going through episode by episode and finding the horribleness that I have intentionally forgotten.
I think it's always going to happen when you view so many episodes of a series side by side as the way we're doing, especially once you've reached the end, and if things have improved. When you go back, you are going to highlight those sort of elements. But not to get too stuck down in that, because, as I say, the other part is fine. I mean, what do you two think? Could you make that side of the episode work even better if you were playing Norman's character differently? Incidentally, his name is far too difficult to pronounce. I'm just going to call him Norman Bates. It's easier. Because I feel if you took out the Troy plot, you're pretty much there. It wouldn't even be that bad working it with him as he is now. I mean, in a way, the Troy plot could kind of stay. If Troy was more involved in the negotiations for some reason, God knows what that may be, if she was more involved in the negotiations and she was the final person that he targeted as part of the conference to try and stop any other party from getting the wormhole, and it was at that point that Riker was able to step in for pretty much the same reasons as he does here, that'd be fine with me. I think I'd rate this a lot higher.
There is an interesting element to this, which is kind of raised as well. It's, should empathy be illegal? Is that an unfair advantage? Is there something wrong in that? And I'm glad that it's not dealt with in any interesting way or explored, but there is that idea raised, and if maybe there wasn't a romance subplot, you could deal a lot more with someone who's using psychic abilities or empathic abilities in secret to their advantage, and what are the moralities of that when you're living in a society which doesn't have that? That's an interesting idea, and sort of someone says, that's pretty bad, isn't it, that you're doing that? And there's no exploration of that. And I guess the fact that he always wins negotiations says, yes, I'm an empath, I keep it secret, and I win. But there's sort of, is that idea, do you have to declare all your abilities if you're in the Federation? Do all aliens have to acknowledge the different things that make them unique? What gives them an unfair advantage? Or are secrets okay? And in the fascist Federation of the future, who knows the answer to that? But that's an interesting idea, which really didn't get to be played out because we were playing with massage oils.
And I mean, all of these ideas are not things that are exclusive to this. I mean, very few ideas will ever be exclusive to one thing. But you can take all of the elements that we're talking about there and relate them to other franchises, and you can see, or films or TV shows, and you can see how they've worked so much better. And when you think of those, you think, oh god, yeah, that would make so much more sense. The idea of playing to someone's little foible or their empathy or something on those lines, I don't know, you could take, say, the third act of Inception, the way that you're trying to play upon someone's fear that they may not be reaching the approval of their father. The whole thing of trying to knock out each person at the deal is not dissimilar to, say, something in a James Bond book. I mean, if I don't know, something like Casino Royale, for example, each person just gradually being knocked out in one way or another not through any physical means, but by cleverness or manipulation. That's good. It's interesting. It's just not done here. Or at least it is. It is to an extent, but it doesn't have the time devoted to it that it should do. I'd also like to see an element that the people selling the wormhole are perhaps aware of the fault of the wormhole. It's not essential, but, if we're talking about if you remove a vast section of the plot of this episode, something to fill it with, again, equally fine.
Or indeed, even that they're not aware, and that it is absolutely devastating to this planet that they now no longer have this resource.
Yeah.
Because it's clear they're pretty desperate. And then that's not explored at all at the end. It's just like, oh, the wormhole's collapsed, we're off.
They had already sold the wormhole at that point to Norman Bates.
Which, and let's talk about that ending. We're jumping all over the place, but then this episode kind of does that anyway. That ending is I guess it wraps everything up, but it feels kind of perfunctory in a way. And it doesn't feel... I mean, it just feels like, I got one over on you. And he's just sort of saying, yeah, you did. And you know what? I'd do it again. Brilliant.
What's his character supposed to be? Is he meant to be this roguish charmer? Or is he just... I don't even know what they're going for. Like, brooding sort of romantic hero? Is he meant to be Byron-esque or what?
I think at first you're sort of meant to suspect that he may be, but as the episode goes on, you're meant to increasingly take against him to the point that you just see him as really manipulative. I don't know, like a guy who puts someone down constantly to try and get something out of them. It's the Mitchell and Webb sketch. You're ugly. You're terrible. How about a little date? That's that sort of way we would look at that character, because he's getting the result through underhand means.
So you're saying that he's basically one of these guys that reads books like The Game and treats people terribly?
Yes, I believe the term is negging, or something along those lines. As you can tell, I've never read The Game because I'm not a horrible person.
So what does that tell us about Troy, then? Our regular character, who we know and love, is it just tell her, well, she's got really terrible judgment, and she's supposed to be the person that understands everyone else?
I mean, I can see what they were going for, and in some ways, it's not a bad idea. The idea that the person who can read other people's feelings is taken advantage of themselves. Yeah, there's a germ of an idea there.
That is a good idea. But do you think they're even going for that, or that just happens to have been how we read it?
I don't know. I do wonder to some degree whether it is us trying to impose goodwill to try and find something to redeem. But, you know, I've said it so many times this episode, I'm repeating myself, but there are bits and pieces that are interesting. So I'd like to think that it was intentional and that just somewhere along the line that's gotten lost.
Do you think the show is a victim of the fact that it was trying to improve the stories by making them character-based? So you have in this episode them trying to force a Troy story onto a plot which didn't need it.
Yeah, no, I'd go with that. They often go very character-centric, quite a lot of episodes a season, as opposed to, I don't know, it feels to me like the ratio of one particular character compared to episodes dealing with an ensemble is greater in the favour of the one character each time. Maybe it's not, it comes across that way.
I think it definitely is. In the last couple of weeks we've had 2 episodes that very much focus on Geordie, and that's fine. And I think they're trying to utilise the cast members who haven't had a lot to do up to this point, but it does feel forced. And you want the stories to arise naturally from the characters, not to have some template bolted onto them.
I think one particular problem for that, and it applies particularly to this episode and the one you were mentioning previously with Geordie trying to knob a computer. The problem is that although you've got this future which is the idea everything's ideal, we don't need money and we don't fight, it's a bizarrely sexless future in a way, in the sort of day-to-day of things, so much so that when you try and deal with a plot with any sort of love or attraction element, it feels like it's heightened to such a ridiculous degree, and this episode is a perfect example of that. The immediate escalation of it is really weird. It's kind of, well, this can't possibly be normal. She must be hypnotized or influenced in some sort of, verging on the date rapey kind of way. And it's not. It's just that these people don't seem to have that element day to day in the other episodes where this isn't a plot that's being focused on. Even just like drop lines or things. I don't know. It's strange to me. I can get why you do it, but for me, it always feels like the Enterprise would regiment sex in much the same way that Hollow Ship does in Red Dwarf. They set aside 15 minutes on a Tuesday.
What do you mean I've got Wesley? Well, he's turned 17 now. Anyone for mixed doubles?
It just means that whenever you have to deal with those ideas, it feels more forced than other character-centric episodes, because there's been other character-centric episodes that we've liked. Measure of a Man. It's just always very specifically love or sex-based episodes. Although it had plenty of other crimes, Angel 1 was also bad for similar reasons.
Shall we just say that was bad? I think we've laid out all the problems, and now shall we talk about Geordi and Data going on a little trip in the shuttle?
I like that bit.
I like that bit as well. I think the shuttle prop, manned probe, I think they call it, is ridiculous and looks ridiculous. But it's quite good fun. They go on a little jaunt. They go, oh, we're in the Gamma Quadrant, and let me tell you, they do not want to be in the Gamma Quadrant. Bad things happen there.
Maybe they could have picked up some Ketrasil White.
Perhaps.
Is that a toothpaste?
Victory is life. Ketrasil White. So you've got this wormhole, this plot device. Let's say you can only use it once, and Data and Geordi go to the other side of the galaxy, find nothing, and then come back again, and then there's no way back. It's like you could do some quite interesting stuff going to the other side of the galaxy, or you could just have a ship fly around, find lots of anomalies, and then resolve everything within 45 minutes. Lots of ways to do episodes on the other side of the galaxy, but it does seem a little bit of a waste. But the Enterprise gets thrown all over space all the time by Q or the Traveller or whatever, so maybe it's not really such a big deal.
Yeah, there's something in that, I suppose, that they travel from one part of empty space into another part of completely empty space. Something that Red Dwarf sent up so well with travelling in time to exactly the same point in empty space with nothing else to travel to. But hey, we've travelled. Maybe it could have been played better, but I kind of don't care, because it's dealing with the slight... I hesitate to call it a mystery, because it's not a mystery, but the interesting idea in the episode that this thing's for sale, and then you're discovering, hey, it's not what they're making out. Okay, they belabor that point far too much. We get it long before we're told. But also you've got the comedy stuff with their interaction with the Ferengi, which is one of the parts of the episode that works. So this scene is always going to stand out above others.
Did you ever think, if we told you that there was a B-plot in this episode and it was with the Ferengi, that would be the best bit of this episode?
But then again, if you told me in season 1 we'd be seeing an episode which featured Troy receiving essential massage with some essential oils, I'd have said I didn't realise that Gene was staying on the show for that long.
Well, I feel exhausted from talking about that. It was remarkably animated.
Unlike the sex scenes.
Let's go to Quickfire.
Quickfire.
Several scenes were cut from this episode, including a short session Troy has with O'Brien that deals with his girlfriend Mitzi, Wesley telling the counsellor about troubles he had with his mother because she wouldn't let him stay overnight at a party on the holodeck, and more background about the Chrysalians.
Michael Pillar said, one of the best scripts we had. I think if you listen to that show and don't watch it, you can really have fun with it. I really thought it was a disappointing episode. It just didn't make it, and it was not a great show. As far as servicing the character of Troy, it was quite a wonderful vehicle, and she was marvellous.
Sorry, it took me a few seconds for that to go in. Did he say it's one of the best scripts?
This episode features things, as I hinted at before, that will become important in future installments of Star Trek. Deep Space Nine, a wormhole goes to the Gamma Quadrant, and that's where they're based, and lots of interesting things happen. And of course Voyager gets trapped in the Delta Quadrant, where it meets a pair of mischievous Ferengi.
I actually think that's a pretty good episode of Voyager. I think it's one of the more hated episodes.
Further quotes from Michael Piller talking about the pre-airing hype regarding a scene in which Troy beds an alien ambassador, causing quite a stir among the fans. "It was never meant to be outrageous television," says Michael Piller. "We got quite a few letters from outraged people before it aired, but nobody wrote after it aired. I listened very carefully to those complaints." It's because they switched off, Michael. They saw it and went, "Oh, God, Jesus. You know what, next week, let's go out for dinner."
I hope one of those letters was from Argyle, and he was just angry that Troy never bedded Argyle. They always do in his fan fictions.
I saw your scene with Troy being oiled up by a man, and I thought, wouldn't that scene be improved if the man was oiling up Argyle?
For trivia fans, Troy's office is given as Deck 8/3472, while her quarters are Deck 9/0910. I think that's something we'll all take away from this episode.
Turning to one of the at least 7 books we use for this podcast, we do our reading. Looking at Star Trek The Next Generation 365, it always asks the deep, pertinent questions. For this episode, it says, "It's unclear whether Dana or Deveroni and Ral brought the massage oil to their little party, but they both seem to enjoy the benefits." Thanks for that, guys.
Matt McCoy, who played Devanoni Rao, he worked with Jonathan Frakes on Dream West, something we're all familiar with, I'm sure.
But what to take away from this episode, ultimately? What to take away? Well, I think that in this situation, perhaps we should turn to the Nitpicker's Guide for Next Generation Trekkers and see what they quote as the literal great line, that's how they quote it, great line of the episode. They choose to run with, "God forbid I should miss my first look at the wormhole." Oh, hang on. No, that is it. I mean, there's brevity, and then there's...
You know, you say Next Generation is stuck in the past, but it is a bit ahead of its time by having Troy basically Facebook stalk Divanoni and him walking in on it. That's the type of thing you get in a rubbish comedy.
That was certainly an episode, and we can all agree on that. We'll be back again next time when we'll be talking about the Vengeance Factor. That sounds like it could be an exciting one. But for now, goodbye.
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 My junk emails continue to impress. I have a junk email that says jazz piano made easy. Piano practice can be fun too. You know, I'm going to click on that. Imagine being able to sit down at a piano and just play ballads, pop, blues, jazz, ragtime, even amazing classical pieces. Now you can, and you could do it in months, not years, without wasting money, time and effort on traditional piano lessons.
My wife, she says your toilet is broken, but it's fixed now.